registered, you have paid your food, because we don't, cannot support the food. So make sure when you check out that you know if you have any debts. And Janne has promised to make a special link for us, so it will be easy to pay with card if you have any
online payment.
An online
if there
payment.
are still some meals you haven't paid for.
Yeah. There has been someone that come very late. Most of you have probably paid your food.
Yes.
So let's start. Or Janne, do you have? I told a little bit about the minister meeting, but
Yeah. So I'm sorry, we have to be. Yesterday was very informal, and it will be it today as well. But one thing we have to be really sharp and strict about is to leave this room at 11 sharp, because 15 past 11, the committees of foreign affairs from the parliaments of Sweden and Finland will have an internal meeting here in this room, and that's the interpretation equipment you see. And actually, one good thing with that is during our excellent keynote lecture that we really are looking forward to, and which is streamed online, and we have some 20 people who have signed up for that stream. They can hear your questions really easily. When you in the public want to ask questions and comments to the keynote speaker after the speech, please push the button there on that one. It turns red, and then you can hear that it works. We already checked that it works. So Vida, is there Camilla? Please introduce Noel so we can get this going.
Yes.
And good morning to you.
So now we're gonna up for our second keynote with Noel B. Salazar, professor in social and cultural anthropology from KU Leuven University in Belgium. So Noel we are so happy to have you here. Where are you, Noel? There. We're so wonderfully happy to have you here, that you could come. And he has a broad experience in issues related to global mobility, migration, tourism, and other forms of travel, heritage that we're discussing here today, cosmopolitanism, cultural brokering, imageries, and endurance hiking and running. And he's edited a great number of books on the topic of mobility and travel, among which he is the editor of the World in Motion series, book series, as well at Bergens. Noel is also the founder of the ESA, Anthropology and Mobility Network, Anthromob, and the Cultural Mobilities Research Cluster at KU Leuven. And he has recently led a project on endurance walking and running. And I could probably stand there all day, talk about all his merits, but I stop there. But now we're going to hear a very interesting lecture on the gravity of walking, a more than human perspective on moving with nature versus rewilding. So please, Noel, come here.
Thank you, Camilla, and thank you for having me. A couple of things. First of all, it's not me talking. I will be doing the talking, but it's not me talking. It's actually, to a great extent, the One by Walking network talking through me. Because as the people who have been participating in the network events will notice, a lot of the things that I'm talking are actually ideas that I gathered by myself participating in the One by Walking events, either online or on site. And so I've been a very attentive listener and participant, and so what I'm presenting is not so much my work as more my understanding of what I take away from having spent the last couple of years with this network that was described yesterday already in very nice terms. And I always say, even though it's a network that started up north, a Nordic network, the word I associate it with is warm. So I think it's an extremely warm network, and I have been very grateful that I've been able to participate also. So thank you to Camilla and all the people behind the network for making this happen. As the people here in the room will have noticed, the room setting has changed a little bit. This has nothing to do with ministers or whatever. It has to do with the title of my talk. Gravity is pointing to some seriousness. It's that, and also the fact that I have a bit of a cold, so I don't want to spread my germs too much, so I ask for a little bit of distance. No, I'm joking. You will see that in my talk I actually don't define or don't explain what the title refers to, what the gravity refers to. That's an exercise I leave up to you to actually figure out what it may refer to. Since yesterday there were certain expectations set, I will have to start with some more poetic thoughts, and so this is how I start with. Lao Tzu once stated, "Good walking leaves no track behind it." Gary Schneider, on the other hand, wrote, "Walking on walking, underfoot earth turns. Streams and mountains never stay the same." The practice of walking is as old as humankind. What is more, according to scholars from various scientific disciplines, walking is what made us human in the first place. Throughout the ages, a multiplicity of meanings has been attributed to walking practices. Walking has served many different purposes, and various ideal types of walkers have been described. The first essay specifically on walking was William Hazlitt's On Going a Journey, published in 1822, and it established the parameters for walking in nature. When thinking about walking, we immediately envision a human activity, something people do somewhere, with the environment in which the walking is taking place being a mere passive background of the action. This anthropocentric understanding of what walking entails is typically Western. At the same time, there is a growing acknowledgement that walking makes us aware of and allows us to flourish as the relational beings that we already are. Anthropologist Tim Ingold has long argued that such a relational way of thinking involves treating the organism not as a discrete, pre-specified entity, but as a particular locus of growth and development within a continuous field of relationships. Philosopher David Macaulay muses that in the act of walking, we are introduced to and into a larger order, a more capacious natural and social world. Through our ambling bodies, we can discover an elemental relationship to the earth, a robust, even when culturally mediated, processual field of phenomena flowing beneath, but not only beneath, our fleeting feet. In restoring us to all of our senses and thereby placing us relationally in the world, walking offers what Macaulay calls an epistemology of contact. One could argue that walking is an activity that requires an elevated level of cognitive ability. However, it should be noted that knowing is not solely confined to the mind, but rather is dispersed throughout the entirety of the network of embodied connections formed by the presence of beings on this planet. Historian Thomas Berry calls the Ecozoic the era defined by the recognition that human life is only a part of the greater living planetary processes that hold and sustain us. The term captures well the integral functioning of life systems and their mutually enhancing relations. Already in the 1950s, anthropologist Robert Redfield had argued that we cannot talk about humans and nature, since humans are, of course, a part of nature. If we have a sense that we are all planetary life, then the inseparable connection between life and non-life shows that we must broaden that circumscription to incorporate the non-living components of this planet in our definition of self. The fields of post-human eco-criticism and new materialism take such a comprehensive approach by focusing on entities such as animals, water, stones, forest, and the planet itself, ascribing qualities such as force, thought, agency, or emergence to them. In general, more than human approaches help us deconstruct dominant dualistic ideologies. They point to the ethical and political relevance of moving with the environment, to feel or think the intensities of the entanglements of human and world. Moving with forces people to rely on their affective experiences. Becoming accountable to the more than human involves taking account of the erasures of other knowledges and methods, erasures which in part have enabled thinking about the more than human as only a recent turn in thought. Moving with then becomes a movement of thought not only with others, but a process of engaging with erased or disavowed histories. As such, it is a moving re-engagement with the ways that the planet and its constituent parts have been understood, protected, feared, and treasured. And so this is already a first link to heritage. While more than human epistemologies may seem novel from a contemporary Western perspective, indigenous knowledge systems show a different picture. The topokinetic nature of knowing through movement has been described on every continent. Within diverse cultural contexts, people often establish their sense of identity by the deliberate act of walking and experiencing their own physical movement within a landscape rich with narratives and histories. The indigenous peoples of North America express the concept of living in harmony with the natural world by referring to it as walking in balance on the earth, wherein every stride taken is regarded as a respectful salutation to the entity known as Mother Earth. A state of overall well-being and a sense of belonging in one's surroundings are outcomes of regular realignment and synchronization with the fundamental forces of nature, achieved via the practice of rituals. The initiatory walkabout undertaken by Aboriginal Australians is an act whereby people turn towards the more than human for understandings that vitalize and sustain human community. According to tradition, this is done by periodically making a ritual journey along the dreaming track, walking in the footstep of the clan ancestor. Australian Aboriginals sing out aloud when they walk in the wild, talking to the rest of the natural world as if they are family. And we did a similar exercise yesterday, not by singing, but by keeping quiet. In such indigenous frameworks, protecting the environment does not come at the expense of human prosperity and well-being. It is the source of it. Unfortunately, many non-indigenous people are unaware of that the vast, expansive living system that inhabits our planet is who we are. Moreover, as a result of the shift from stewardship and trust to ownership and control, it is harder for us to behave as people with commitments to the wider Earth community's health and well-being. We are an integrated living system in constant motion, surrounded by and infused within a large entity called the biosphere, which includes all living beings. Ironically, imagining anthropogenic climate change and its associated ecological and socio-cultural transformations has opened options for the development of new types of human-environment relations. In the act of slow and reflexive walking, as an example, people are introduced or reintroduced to and into a larger order, a more capacious natural and social world. A phenomenological approach to a human being in the world attempts to overcome the Cartesian dualistic separation of body and mind, nature and culture, still permeating Western societies and sciences. In such an integrated approach, neither nature nor environments are something we consider from a distance, but something we are an integral part of. And I move now to some considerations on wild and how we associate wild also with walking and walking in wild environments and what that means and why that should be important. And I start with another more poetic text which you can read here, but maybe I will also read aloud. When a Confucian scholar visited the Zen master, he asked, "What is the ultimate secret of Zen?" The master answered, "You have a fine saying in your Analects, 'I have nothing to hide from you.' So has Zen nothing hidden from you." "I cannot understand," said the scholar. Later they had a walk together along a mountain path. The white laurel happened to be blooming. The master said, "Do you smell the fragrance of the flowering tree?" The scholar responded, "Yes, I do." Then declared the master, "I have nothing hidden from you." According to the post-human paradigm, humans are living tissue, amalgamated from diverse elements of this planet that momentarily make up the human body before transforming into other systems. A live world is marked by the fact that humans cannot be separated from the dynamic environment in which they live and are engulfed. Contemporary attempts to connect or reconnect humanity to the environment are taking multiple forms, many of which can be linked historically to well-established but dated ideas of Romanticism in Europe and Transcendentalism in the USA, and the incorporation of Asian spiritual influences by both philosophical streams. Interpretive heritage walks, as an example, are a means of encouraging greater awareness of and pride in particular environments. In my own research on recreational outdoor practices such as hiking and running, traces of these connections are visible in nature-based walking meditation, forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku, Shi running, inspired by Tai Chi, and jogging, a combination of yoga and running. In Western culture, notions of the wild and wilderness have long been reputed to refer to empty spaces devoid of culture, signs of civilization and development and human presence. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Europeans laid the intellectual foundation for a more favorable attitude towards so-called wild nature. The notion of the sublime and picturesque had a pivotal role in advocating for the aesthetic appreciation of untamed landscapes. Combined with the imaginary of a life closer to nature, these concepts contributed to the development of the Romantic movement. The Romantic writers and poets created a taste for nature, reinforcing the idea that a proper way of communing with nature is by walking through the countryside. In this tradition, walking is supposed to be wholesome, in the sense that it heals you from modern alienation and unites you with nature. Yet, as critics have pointed out, these notions are nothing but imaginaries that have regularly resulted in erasing others, such as indigenous people, and in blindly reinforcing an artificial nature-culture binary. Despite all scholarly criticisms, there has been a considerable surge in the demand for experiencing nature. Experiences set in natural environments are currently immensely popular. With increasing leisure time and mobility, and through the designation of national parks and wilderness areas, the natural environment is made accessible to large numbers of people. The notion that in this way a wilderness or outdoor recreation experience can be supplied seems at odds with the implied freedom of wilderness. The specific form of nature that we desire should or need to establish or re-establish a connection with, as well as the method of engaging with it, may vary depending on the motivations behind seeking such a relationship. If our motivation is merely to alleviate stress, a walk in an urban park should suffice. Consequently, we may feel motivated to issue disclaimers and recognize only the benign, inspiring, and appealing quality of nature as the ones we should embrace in close proximity to where we live. Entomologist Elizabeth Willott nicely captures this tension. I quote her here. "When we say we desire to experience nature, including restored environments, what most of us mean is that we desire to experience selected aspects of nature. We prefer not to experience serious illness or traumatic death. While recognizing the importance of predators in an ecosystem, we prefer that our families are not the prey. Unquote. This focus on clearly beneficial nature and the exclusion of problematic wildlife follows many past attempts to bring humans and nature together. Such efforts, epitomized in the tradition of Arcadia, a vision of a lost form of living in harmony with nature dating back to the ancient Greek mythology, often involved a specific idea of wildness. Over the centuries, the Arcadian tradition has taken two main forms: the sublime wilderness, or the primitive, and the rural idyll, or the pastoral. By arguing that meaning is invariably made by socio-cultural systems, the more than human world is stripped of agency and valency. Nature is elided, rendered unable to participate in its own representations. While constructivism sought to give voice to minorities who had been repressed by the structuring of discourse, in the case of the natural world, it left the other of animal, plant, and ecosystem silenced. Because according to constructivism, there is no longer any nature and no wild, because we have all accepted the culturally constructed and always already artifactual status of such designations. There is nothing to stop us from technologically remaking our landscapes without reference to such sentimental antiquarianisms as biodiversity, ecological baselines, or uniqueness. For some time now, those who speak up for either making or saving significant space for more than human nature, or what in the American Wilderness Act of 1964 is called the earth and its community of life, have found themselves quickly denounced as romantic or nostalgic. In any case, wild places around the globe continue to exercise a powerful pull over the popular imagination. As writer Robert Macfarlane puts it, it is less about the clear absence of humans and their history and culture from these places, and much more about the subjective feeling of being alive and moving around in a place animated by at least a modicum of self-will, the idea at the etymological root of the word wild. That wildness as a process rich with vitality and unpredictability depends. For Macfarlane, walkers wear the landscape and navigate in it in two complementary ways. On a literal geomorphological level, as we walk, we leave a trace on the ground with the fall of our feet. However, as poets and writers for centuries have suggested, the paths we abrade into the earth also wear upon us, impressing themselves onto our imagination. We carry them in our minds as we make our way in the world. When we walk, land and landscape also imprint upon our bodies. Walking attunes us to the connection between humans and the more than human, to the physical and chemical reactions that occur when we walk through a place. Our bodies are constantly entangled with the climate, the environment, and the air we breathe. These things circulate through and within us as we move, which brings us to questions of methodology. Walking has been widely adopted as an embodied methodological practice. In Ways of Walking, Ethnography and Practice on Foot, anthropologists Tim Ingold and Jo Vergunst introduce various studies, papers, and collective efforts to conceptualize walking as essential human experience, social activity, and way of thinking and researching. And this was the book which in my discipline really put walking on the map. Their phenomenological orientation positions walking as central to the way in which humans come to be in and now the world which they inhabit. Insights into how people walk and create routes and how they themselves reflect on these practices provide something of a key to understanding their ways of being in the world. The scholarship on walking examines how the act of walking expands the scope of inquiry to include aspects such as location, sound, and interaction, elements that embody the spontaneous and evolving nature of engaging with the world. Walking methodology can be considered particularly suitable for relational, material, and situated research. Geographer Hayden Lorimer argues that in the midst of walking, it is possible to think about being in the world and find grounds for a freer, experiential exploration of what it is to be or to become. In this perspective, the walker seeks to reach into intimacies of encounter, rather than focusing on the outer, symbolic or socialized meaning of walking arts. Fellow geographer John Wiley's walk along the southwest coast path sought to activate the space and time within which he might engage with and explore issues of landscape, subjectivity, and corporeality. Such type of reflexive walking is a practice that involves walking with a heightened awareness of one's surroundings and the sensation in one's body. It is a form of attentive walking that encourages individuals to be present in the moment and to reflect on their thoughts and feelings as they walk. This combination of the reflexive walking self in the midst of shifting hues, tones, and colors, and the intensity of places and situations generates affect, an intensity, a field perhaps of awe, irritation, or serenity, which brings together walker and landscape in a union in which it becomes impossible to tell the one from the other. Landscape and self are mutually configured. In other words, walking reflexively becomes a walking with multiple others. And it would have been interesting, and maybe we can do this during the break also, to talk about the experiences that people had yesterday after the or during the night walk, what kind of things they experienced. The idea of walking as multisensory embodied experience has been discussed increasingly across the social sciences and humanities. According to Macaulay, walking puts the world back into perspective. Via our porous and sensing bodies, walking deepens and thickens the perceptual scene, unlike seated driving, which tends to thin, draw out, and attenuate our experiences. That the senses interrupt and mediate everyday walking practices is something indigenous people have acknowledged for a long time. And I quote here something from a book that was published in the 1980s. A man in Anaktuvuk Pass, in response to a question about what he did when he visited a place, said to me, "I listen." That's all. I listen. He meant to what the land is saying. I walk around in it and strain my senses in appreciation of it for a long time before I myself ever speak a word. Reflexive walking can thus be understood as a kind of embodied experiential learning. Literary scholar Karin Gertz elucidated how walking promotes divergent rather than convergent thinking, and is an excellent facilitator of original, innovative thinking, because the physical act of left-right steps simulates the integration of the two halves of the brain, the logical and the intuitive. As such, walking is an interactive way of knowing or coming to know, allowing the entire body and all of its senses to experience the surroundings, to trace and connect different areas, to intuitively sense when and how to avoid potential dangers, and to live in entangled social pathways. In reflexive walking, or what authors such as arts educator Juha Jung call mindful walking, the body is engaged in the act of walking, which then becomes the lived experience, information received in multiple ways, through seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting, overall sensing, and mentally connecting. Walking in the same environment, different individuals are sensitive to different stimuli. Every individual navigates a sensory universe tied to a personal history born of his or her education. And this is also why, again, I'm very interested in what the experiences were after yesterday's night walk. Within walking scholarship, the individual human, and often white privileged male, bipedal body has dominated as a figure of movement, with environments, organisms, and other people often playing the role of scenic backdrop. One possible new thread of research would be to learn from different practices of how people walk with environments and how environments walk with them. This requires a certain more than human intimacy, referring to the sensual, emotional, spiritual, and personal entanglements that walking includes in a constant and thorough proximity. And some of the people in the room here know very well about what I'm talking, because they have done research about this and written about this. Another thread would be to consider how the decentering of the human can generate diverse ways of understanding environmental movements. The point here is not to stretch walking into an amorphous analytic, but to consider how it is a cascade of relations and relationalities through which entities and worlds mobilize and are mobilized, leading among others to more than human care. These relations, moreover, can be activated through decentering humans as situated within specific places. Such a realignment can draw attention to the way of knowing and being in sites that also overlook other environment inhabitations, from indigenous experience and cosmologies to more than human relations, which are often rendered less significant when addressing environmental change. Anthropologist Natasha Myers has experimented with walking to think with plant sentience. Methods, she contends, are practices for cultivating modes of attention that might help tune into the deep time of these lands and the natural cultural happenings shaping its present. The modes of attention inquire about the significance of many aspects pertaining to the land. Such practices of attunement allow researchers to become more consciously aware of the qualities, the rhythms, forces, relations, and movements of the humans and non-humans they are researching with. The act of tuning into something is distinct from the acts of capturing or documenting it. The process involves the act of bending and folding, or what historian Carla Hustak and Natasha Myers together call involuntary momentum, or involutionary momentum, that's how they call it. Involution, as opposed to evolution, is a relational movement, a coupling, a commingling. Involutionary readings, they write, give way to livelier ontologies and interactive worldings. The focus lies on the exploration of uncertainties, prompting the question of whether methods of physical presence, cognitive focus, and creative thinking are necessary to get a comprehensive understanding of this location. And for people who might be wondering, this is not something that I wrote, because there's an error in it, but this is something I took from the internet. As a geographer Juanita Sundberg notes, walking with is a way of walking toward more pluriversal worlds and encounters. Indigenous scholars, however, have critically interrogated the more than human term, arguing that it continues to erase indigenous understandings that have always attended to non-human animacy. The individuals to whom we attribute the remarkable understandings of the concepts of more than human, sentience, agency, and the means by which we can envision our shared cosmopolitical concerns are not the individuals responsible for constructing and upholding the knowledge systems that European and North American anthropologists and philosophers have extensively examined for over a century. These knowledge systems have formed the foundation upon which many contemporary ontological breakthroughs or reconceptualizations are based. By exclusively referencing Western intellectuals who engage with the concept of the more than human, while neglecting to acknowledge the contributions of indigenous scholars who explore similar themes, we inadvertently reinforce the hegemony of Western knowledge. Moving on to the last part, the connection between walking, health, well-being, healing. And I start with another quote. When you walk into a forest, great or small, you enter in it one state and emerge from it calmer. You have that cathedral feeling and you're never the same again. You come out of there and you know something big has happened to you. Science allows us to explain a part of that sacred experience. We know that the alpha and beta pinene produced by the forest actually do uplift your mood and affect your brain through your immune system. That pinene released by the trees into the air is absorbed into your body. It tightens you as a unit and makes you reverent towards what you are seeing. Simply walking into a forest is a holiday for your mind and soul, allowing your imagination and creativity to bloom. I think that is a miracle, and there are so many other miracles of the natural world left for us to discover. We will feel the joy of those miracles. We will save the forest and our planet. The trees are telling us how to do just that. All we have to do is listen and remember. The experience of nature has often been believed to have therapeutic effects and healing properties, with significant theoretical and empirical data to support this statement. Empirical support for the value of contact with nature is growing at an enormous rate, with an extraordinary degree of consistency across research paradigms and theoretical views. Research has shown that wilderness has a restorative quality, that outdoor physical exercise has a positive impact, and that people usually enjoy the challenge of being in the outdoors. Naturalist Henry David Thoreau, one of the forebears of the environmental movement, was among those who singularly included nature as an element of the socioculturally constructed notion of the good life. As Thoreau helped to reveal, walking in the wilderness is oriented by and often directed via the encompassing four classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Walking then is a way of becoming attuned to the earth and the other elements, especially but not only in a wilderness setting. Interestingly, Thoreau virtually ignored current environmental concerns with the preservation of habitats and species. The idea of nature experiences being therapeutic and healing for the individual in a time of climate and ecological breakdown is worth scrutiny and reflection. Those who follow in Thoreau's steps obviously no longer ignore the issues of environmental degradation, but they regard nature as an essential part of a good life and see its rehabilitation as part of our own rehabilitation. Ironically, the very source of well-being and health benefits is the same resource and commodity that is being systematically destroyed by our ecocidal, carbon-fueled societies that continue to fail to make the radical and urgent adaptations required for the new environmentally sustainable ways of living. When forester Aldo Leopold referred to the health of the land, he was employing less metaphor than one might think. He defined health as the capacity of the land for self-renewal and ecological conservation as our effort to understand and preserve this capacity. The individual acting within the framework of a land ethic, according to an ecological conscience, should take responsibility for the health of the land. That the renewal of the land's health will be a renewal of society's health was Leopold's prophetic message. In a similar vein, ecopsychology argues that as we are naturally inclined to connect and have a relationship with our planet and the natural world, we will psychologically as well as materially suffer if our planet falls deeper into environmental chaos. The modern health crisis and the deterioration of planetary health stem from severe connections with nature. Nature-based solutions are put forward to restore health across the personal to planetary health continuum. While walking, alongside other healthy mobilities, such as cycling, is often celebrated as a best buy for public and planetary health, it is important to acknowledge that these practices may also negatively impact planetary health. The coronavirus crisis made us acutely aware of this tension. The recognition of the damaging impact of human activity in nature has led to the theory and practice of rewilding, a progressive approach to conservation biology that was developed in the late 1980s. It is about letting nature take care of itself, enabling natural processes to shape land and sea, repair damaged ecosystems by reintroducing species to environments where they used to be prior to being driven off by humans, and restore degraded landscape. Through rewilding, wildlife's natural rhythms create wilder, more biodiverse habitats and restore connectivity between fragmented protected areas. Paradoxically, as processes such as rewilding help nature become wilder again, this simultaneously helps nature become even more attractive for people to explore through walking and other activities. Coming slowly to some concluding thoughts, a last long quote. To live healthily and successfully on the land, we must also live with it. We must be part not only of the human community, but of the whole community. We must acknowledge some sort of oneness, not only with our neighbors, our countrymen and our civilization, but also some respect for the natural world as well as for the man-made community. Ours is not only one world, in the sense usually implied by that term, it is also one earth. And notice that this was written already in 1955. Through dominant socio-cultural practices, we are persistently taught how to read and react to nature, rather than allowing ourselves to understand and come to know nature through our own active embodiments and movements. We are human and more than human, tangible and intangible, and everything in between, especially those relationships which constantly bring us into being. As humans, we are perpetually engaged in a state of coexistence with entities that are not of human nature and are never situated outside of a complex network of interconnections or an ecological system. To engage with the more than human is to acknowledge that we are not separate from other species, nor their precarious future. In this context, walking is ultimately a responsibility, a responding to the coexistence, intrinsic to place, a call that asks we offer something of ourselves to the human and non-human others whose relationship and relationships support us. Amidst the prevailing sense of contemporary alienation, particularly among urbanites, the act of walking emerges as a subversive endeavor, facilitating people in their contemplation of the intricate interplay between their physical selves and the surrounding environment. Walking, then, is a foundational more than human practice, and highly likely one of the reasons people feel so much at home while moving with nature and gain so much pleasure from it. The act of walking, which is considered the fundamental human activity, has the ability for people to foster a sense of groundedness and restore a feeling of belonging with the natural environment. Moreover, walking can be regarded as an enduring attribute inherent to the human species. Nobody walks, behaves, senses, or interprets the same thing. It is what makes it so special in the most basic sense of the word. The act of walking takes on highly significant, indeed a pivotal role, becoming the means through which human beings learn to understand the world about them as they pass through it. And the trace they leave behind them is not merely recorded in the paths that are left in their wake, but also in the oral histories and texts through which such actions are recorded. There is an existential component to walking in which this most natural and instinctive of acts becomes at the same time a conscious activity. As Tim Ingold and Joe Vergun stated in their 2008 text, walking is not just what a body does, it is what a body is. The capacity for walking to alter consciousness is hugely significant because it opens the possibilities for encounters with landscape that engage with the beyond human and supernatural. If one walks this reflexive way, strange things may always happen because we are open to those possibilities. Extensive scholarly inquiry has been conducted about walking, examining the influence of psychological, social, and environmental elements on individuals' engagement in physical activity. Furthermore, it has acknowledged the positive effects of physical activity on mental health and overall well-being. Physicians in various countries are now giving people nature or green prescriptions. However, the human landscape relations generated by walking have the potential to expose vulnerabilities too. Walking is believed to have lower environmental impacts than other activities in natural environments. At the same time, there is a tension between the need for individual connection with nature and the negative environmental impact this often has. Just think of large-scale erosion, damaged vegetation, disruption to wildlife, altered hydrology, widening of trails, and increased muddiness. Walking as a means to an end becomes walking as an end in itself, as a form of therapy, but only to heal the human. In other words, walking in nature is not necessarily good. Other activities may be environmentally better. And if we want to walk at all, what matters is how we walk. We need to move beyond the category of nature to recognize how experiences of health and well-being emerge through dynamic, more than human relations. For example, with individual species, creatures, flows of weather, terrain, technology, and tools. The concept of health must be reinvented as a dynamic entity that arises from intricate linkages and connections, including not only the individual physical body, but also the more than human. These shifting relational configurations continually shape and reshape people's capacities to affect and be affected in ways that produce moments of health and well-being, or conversely, experiences of illness, impairment, or exclusion. After all, healing means nothing else but to make whole again, thus requiring a holistic approach. And I end it here.
Hello? Thank you.
Half past.
Vi har alltså vad klockan var det?
26.
Jo, men då är ju tid
Till 20.
Jo.
Sorry, just checking some with the time. So thank you so much, Noel, for this fantastical overview of a lot of things that had happened during our talks and summarizing it wonderfully and pointing out the tensions and bringing out new ideas. So I will just open for the floor, and there are probably lots of questions here. So yes, start.
Thank you so much, Noel, for this dazzling synthesis of theoretical frameworks through history and disciplines. So I have 3 interconnected questions for you, mini questions. So I'm curious to know how you define wild, and whether you think that there is a difference between wild and wilderness, and whether you think that wild and wilderness are the same everywhere in the world.
My answer can be short. I actually don't define those concepts. I'm interested in how those concepts are being used, and those concepts are being used differently in different contexts. And to make it more complex, you talk about wild and wilderness. There's also wildness. So there's all this different concepts, but of course it's all about what I call a kind of imaginary of what is imagined to be wild, and it's always referring to nature, and it's in a way also referring to something, to a state that must have existed, or at least that's the imagination. And I'm very interested in how people define it, and how people also define the relation of people to that wildness. What place do people have, if at all, in this imagined concept of wild? Because it's very interesting if you try to recreate and you try to rewild. So rewilding means that you are trying to recreate something that must have existed, that got lost, and so you are recreating it. You must have a very clear conception of what it is. To which state are you bringing it back? And we talked about this yesterday. To which point are you going back in time? Because of course, in the environment is constantly changing. So if you say rewilding, to which point do you go back? You, as a human who try to influence this process, you can only go back to moments where you kind of know or think to know how it must have looked like. And so this is kind of limiting, and it's very interesting to kind of understand what people mean when they use those concepts. And this is what I am a scholar, I'm most interested in, not in giving now the ultimate definition of what wild is, but really in trying to understand in how different peoples, including scholars from different disciplines, how they use these concepts, and then also maybe point out that we may not be talking about the same thing when we are using the same concept.
Okay, Roger.
Thank you, Minister Salazar. Just a quick question building on this last question. I mean, in kind of nature recovery processes, you have, restoration and rewilding. And obviously they refer to, in a way, the same thing, but they're slightly different. I mean, restoration tends to rely more on historical benchmarks and taxidermic precedents, maybe. And rewilding, the literature on rewilding seems to be a bit more essayistic, anecdotal, journalistic, and restoration seems more kind of grounded in sort of empirical studies. But I wanted to ask kind of methodologically, how can, given the many debates on rewilding and on different types of nature recovery in different parts of the world, and of course ideas like wild or wilderness or wildness are indeed very culturally specific, how can walking as a method, as a practice, be used to kind of maybe, I don't know, iron out or help us wrestle with, some of the controversies of what, the more, let's say, politicized or progressive ideas of rewilding are aiming to do to the environment or to nature? Is there, I know you've, run lots of workshops on walking at different events, but is there a way that walking could be used as a method for sort of walking the path between these different forms of recovering and moving nature somehow towards a better future?
So thank you for asking that question. It comes at the time I actually just come back from having spent a week in Zagreb in Croatia, where we were doing a workshop also on something which is almost the opposite of what you are referring to. And it's about the focus there was on the post-industrial city, where you have these parts of cities that are basically ruins, that were once vibrant factories and things that are now totally dead. So at least dead in terms of human activity, and so they were using also and exploring walking as a methodology to how can people reconnect to those places. But what was very interesting is that when walking through those areas, you could see that since these places have been kind of abandoned by humans, nature is taking over. Nature is taking over, and those places actually are full of life. And so this is really interesting. So you can approach these things in different ways, and it is actually by walking in those sites, and I think walking has something to do with lots of the things that I expressed here. This connection, the gravity is also this idea of being pulled to the ground. Of course, we have the effect of gravity, but also this connectedness with actually the earth. But it's also something related to a certain speed. So the slow speed allows you to actually connect much better to basically what is happening around you. But in order to answer now your question, how can walking helps? I think it is of course kind of tricky and kind of difficult, because in the end the walking we do is pretty much a human activity, except if we go walking with our pet. But so how can it help us in an unmediated way? And this is of course something, if we are talking about how can walking as a method help us to think about these issues of restoration or rewilding. The question is also how does that process work, and what are the mediating processes in between? Because of course when we walk, we all have feelings, we all have these things of affect also that I refer to, and to getting from there, from these personal experiences to something that needs to be kind of translated. Because if you're talking about using walking as a methodology, then you need to have a process of translation. So how do you do that translation? And as always with translation, what gets lost? Lots of things get lost in translation always. And so can walking be a useful method? Yes, but it's maybe not the method, and it should maybe not be the only method. I think walking definitely as a method has potential, but it's good to combine that also with other things, and to really think also about how we can translate whatever walking does. And I think that there, the kind of talks we are doing and I'm doing here, is pure discourse is not enough. So we have to look much more at the artistic way of actually translating whatever it is that is going on. I think there in terms of methodology, there's a lot to be gained.
Okay, thank you. Time is running. We have questions with the people who are with us on Zoom, so I would let in one question from there, and it's what does the act of walking require validation from medical science, health, in the age of consumerism?
Well, I don't know about the consumerism part. It's very interesting how walking is now becoming a kind of accepted therapy, and of course this can be capitalized upon. So there are products that are being developed, all kind of companies who are now positioning themselves about helping people with providing that therapy, and so this is always, as soon as there is something interesting popping up, then you have all this other forces that are maybe corrupting the original idea. But it's very interesting that walking is being prescribed, so that doctors now in quite a number of countries are are recognizing this as a kind of a therapy. Not, of course, thinking about, and this is very interesting because now in the whole medical scene, there's this idea of One Health, and One Health is very much also recognizing that human health is pretty much dependent on basically the health of the planet. And so if you would prescribe walking in nature to all the humans on this planet, what kind of effect would that have on the planet itself? And so these are things that are not really talked about. So right now it works because it's limited to the happy few. But if you would think about, you know, the numbers of people living on this planet, the consequences may be...
We have 2 minutes, so super short, Emily, and super short
There's
answer,
another question.
and then we have
Or was there somebody else?
Lena.
Okay, super short. I just wanted to say how much we have to go back. I had a discussion, my son, 5-year-old, asked like how, about the first human. I chose to talk about evolution. I was like, which version should I go? And then after a few weeks, he was like, Mom, were you a monkey when you were a kid? So maybe it's enough to go back to the beginning of the 80s. And okay, so maybe this is also like, we can think about it later together, but about the reconceptualization. So I was thinking that when you were drawing on the post-humanist discussions and new material discussions, and you use other concepts than talking about human and nature, and as you referred to that also. But then when coming to these kind of foods on examples, then we go back to kind of like what do we do in practice about that. We start to talk again, and I think we all struggle with that in our own languages. Roger in 11 different languages, but like what concepts to use, and it becomes easy also that we go back to this discourse of consumer, like somehow we're consuming the nature, or it's like this individualistic. How do you think kind of what possibilities to go beyond the concept of nature?
Yeah, so this is what I was saying also before. I think that our spoken and written language is very limited. It's very limited in terms of vocabulary that we have. And of course, different languages offer different possibilities. So some languages are actually richer in kind of terms they have than other languages. But I think it's overall very limiting. And that's why I think we need to look for other ways of expressing. And that's why I'm looking really towards the arts. I think in the arts there are a lot of other languages that are being used that offer far more possibilities to actually talk about and express those things that we actually experience when we are walking with nature. The big challenge is, of course, also to make those languages and ways of expression accepted in the scholarly and academic world.
Sorry, we are told to be really strict about this, but then again, we are happy. We will still have more time to discuss together. I would just say super thank you, Noel, for this splendid and wonderful talk, and to have given us so much more to discuss and think of today. Now we will have a short break, and we will meet again for the workshop. So Maria's workshop, Victoria's workshop will be in Blixtlås. And oh, sorry, okay. We will meet for new sessions.